This is TWiT.
Tech Break on the TWiT Network is brought to you by ACI Learning. ACI Learning's unique video platform hosts a library of engaging and convenient on-demand video learning. Or receive one-to-one support from an instructor at one of their hub locations. Maintain your company's competitive edge with ACI Learning. Visit acilearning.com to see how they can help elevate your team. The Irish regulators have ruled that Meta, they're fining Meta $400 million, but more importantly, they're saying you cannot use what you know about your users to sell ads.
Did a very sad trombone sound right here.
Yeah. A top European Union privacy regulator ruled, this is from the Wall Street Journal, Meta platforms cannot use its contracts with Facebook's and Instagram users. They can't say, hey, they said it was okay. Look, they signed this special contract, which nobody reads, to justify sending them ads based on their online activity.
Now, this long run screws media too.
It screws everybody. Google, probably more than anybody else.
Yes.
Now, a $400 million fine is to Facebook is not the end of the world. Bigger.
These days.
Maybe. Yeah,
well,
maybe.
They have, well, it's part of it is this is the first, isn't this one of the first resolutions? The GDPR was passed a few years ago.
Yep.
And there were massive complaints that the process was, anybody, any citizen of the EU, or I think certain residents and other organizations could file complaints, and companies would be forced to turn over a significant percentage, like single-digit percentage of their annual revenue and global revenue, if I recall right?
Yep.
And this, as I read this, these are 2018 complaints being resolved in late 2022, early 2023 here, right? And the Irish regulators now issued $1 billion in fines, but it took a while. So these companies are able to reap the rewards from it. And also with Apple's change their do not track me thing, that policy, which Facebook said was going to cost them billions. There's been some disputes about whether Meta really incurred that kind of cost, but people, when given the choice, say, please do not track me across apps. And that's kind of the fundamental privacy issue. And it's going to cost these companies money that built their operations around tracking them across apps. But in this case, this is even like within the app, right? This is where it gets to it, is it's within their systems.
You agreed when you signed up for Instagram that we could track you. You allowed us to,
right? And
you still can't. Now, according to the Wall Street Journal,
but they're saying you have to expose it better.
No. They're saying you may not, despite. You cannot use its contracts with Facebook and Instagram users to justify sending them ads based on their online activity.
Right, but you could revise that and expose. What they're saying is you could expose, as I understood it, you could expose an option for people, which is buried in the agreement now, but legitimately you could expose an option and let people choose to be tracked, and that's kind of what Apple did. And most people opted out, but not everybody. But Apple provided a very binary option.
Apple doesn't really sell ads.
Yeah, and
it does.
So Meta, well, somewhat, but it's not the big business. But Meta could provide, incentives or present it in a different way that could wind up being compliant, that would be explicit instead of buried in an agreement and be in compliance. So they have options. They just don't like them as well as just hiding it from the user that they're doing this.
This is
but
what
it also just demonizes this idea of targeting as if it's the whole. It drives me nuts. A lot of it is this horrible book I had to finish reading. It's not surveillance. Surveillance is when governments come after you with police and watch you. This is ad tracking. It's a way that media and the internet is still seen as a medium. I think that's one of the mistakes here, including news, including a lot of entertainment, makes money so that you get what you get inexpensively. So what we're going to see out of this is, tons of paywalls now and further redlining of quality news and entertainment for the privileged, not for the society at whole. And it's going to be long-term damaging, I argue.
So according to the Wall Street Journal, this issue is over first-party data.
Right.
You can say, as Apple does, block third-party trackers, but Apple, Facebook, and Google all use first-party data, and that's specifically what the Irish regulator is disallowing. Meta has long allowed users to opt out of personalized ads based on data it gleans from users' activity on other websites and apps, but it doesn't give users that option for opting out of ads based on data about activity on its own platform, Instagram or Facebook, such as what posts a user comments on, what videos an Instagram user watches. The journal says that in-house data is one of Meta's main tools for building customized audiences for the personal ads it sells. This is the first-party loophole that Apple and others conveniently ignore. We've said this again and again. Yeah, all Apple's saying is you can't track, somebody else's app, but Apple knows exactly what you do on the phone. Google knows exactly what you do every time you go on a search. Meta knows exactly what you're doing on every single Meta property. Now the EU is saying you can't even use that data. I don't see anywhere where it says you could you have to ask permission. Maybe there is a loophole.
I'm looking at the story. I thought it says they don't. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Meta says it disagrees with the ruling and plans to appeal.
Yeah.
And the journal says that could take years. But if the decisions are upheld, they could mean that Meta will have to allow users to opt out of ads that are based on how users interact with its own apps. So I guess that implies a switch. Yeah.
But in a question, and it's first-party data. If it's third-party data, maybe it should be opt-in or it should be informed in Apple's way. I guess, right, this gets us to the heart of, what we're paying for. If we're the product, even if we're the product of a first-party customization, there's some things I want delivered that way. I remember when Gmail launched and people were freaked out, and in some ways rightly so, that Google would analyze the contents of our email and serve personalized ads based against that, right? And now it's, I don't know, how many years later are we, 17 years or something? And it's still doing some variety of that. We don't have end-to-end encryption on email, although Gmail recently announced they're going to enable an option for that, and then they won't be able to sell ads against the contents of email. So,
but Google's long said we don't do that anyway. Google can easily.
Well, they're doing something, right? They're doing something contextual. They
say they don't.
Early, but they stopped.
Not the contents.
They say they do not, but they don't, and that's only because they don't need to. Every time you do a search. You're announcing what your interests are. You give people that information. So here's what I see as the critical thing. Apple's ATT switch, which, by the way, a majority of users say, no, I don't want tracking, never stopped first-party data. It doesn't stop Apple. Right. Now the EU is saying, Apple, Google, Meta, you have to offer a switch that stops first-party data. And I think every single user will turn that off.
And I don't think that's in GDPR. That's the other thing. I think it's a misreading. As bad as GDPR is and as confusing as it is, I think that's a misreading of what's there. Because again, when the newspapers realize and news publishers realize what's going on here, and entertainment companies realize what's going on here in this streaming world that is more and more supported by advertising, they're going to have fits here. Because I've been pushing every news organization out there to say, change your product strategy so you get first-party data. That is your only defense. Google went out there, right, and tried to kill cookies, and the publishers weren't ready. So they're the ones who said, no, hold on to cookies for now, because they don't know what they're doing and they don't have their first-party data strategies. They're going to be screwed all around. This is going to kill tons of media.
This is what the journal says. Ireland did not want to do this, but they found that nothing in GDPR stopped Meta from making behavioral ads a necessary part of its contract with users. But a number of other EU privacy regulators disagreed, arguing that behavioral ads are not necessary to provide a social network. They didn't need those ads. And a board of all EU privacy regulators, the European Data Protection Board, last month overruled Ireland as part of a dispute resolution system built into GDPR. So what happened is Ireland said, yeah, GDPR does not disallow this. But the rest of Europe said, no, wait a minute, it does.
Or a body representing the rest of Europe.
Said, no, we believe that, in fact, this is under the domain of GDPR, and it isn't necessary for Meta to create a business. So we believe that you should stop it. And I think this is a significant shot across the bow. And I think it should not be ignored. Now it's going to take a while. It'll be appealed. There'll be a lot of litigation. But there's a risk.
What does the U.S. government do at the time when the U.S. government is starting, under both parties, is going at a pincer against Silicon Valley? This is about protecting American industry. You watch what's happening with Mastodon. It's fascinating. that the EU government is investing in Mastodon stuff, which I think is fine. I've said it to you for years. Stop whining about Google, invest in your own stuff. But because it's European and it's anti-Silicon Valley, the government is taking a real role there in trying to fight Silicon Valley. And the U.S. government is going to have to say in trade agreements, whoa, here. We'll see what they do.
Yeah, I mean, I think users want that switch. Users want to be able to say, don't track me, bro.
But they see. I think there's a fundamental issue not about whether personalized ads should be used at all and whether companies should have a right to use data they collect from you within their own systems in order to feed advertising. I think it's an ecosystem issue, it's a disclosure issue, and it's also a what are we paying for issue, right? I preferentially pay for or use services that I know are not making money off me in a secondary way whenever it's possible. It's one reason why, again, like Mastodon, I'm not paying for Mastodon yet, but it is a superior product in some ways already for my particular set of interests because I'm not worried about Twitter's business model anymore, what they're doing with my data. Now, I do want to pay somebody for Mastodon in some distributed way. Leo, thank you very much for underwriting the 100 million tweets I've made on the twit.social server. Leo's paying for me right now.
Wonderful person, and I'm very glad to have you on the Mastodon.
So you're my volunteer payment coordinator here for this service. But so I don't blame Google or Apple or any of the companies for wanting to do it. I feel like, I mean, if the EU went too far, it's in creating not providing enough guidance about what to do. And if the option were, look, you got to have a really clear page where someone can go and say, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. And the companies, I think, by contrast, should say, if you flip the switch off, you're going to need to upgrade to a subscription where you pay X. I mean, that's the Twitter trade-off, right? We're seeing in real time Elon Musk discover what advertising actually brings to Twitter and how his $8 a month service doesn't necessarily replace the value of the ads he wants to turn off. So, is it a privacy thing when everything's first party and everything's kept within the system? Not as much as when we find out that companies have been leaking first party stuff into third parties, which comes up all the time. So there's trust issues. I don't know.
Glenn, I think you're way right. Going back to the very beginnings, to the first days of the first cookies. Your cookies were necessary for the maintenance of web operations. When they got used for advertising, we were not in the least transparent about it. It made it easy for the Wall Street Journal to come along and demonize them. What do they know about you? What they know, right? It was a whole big series. And the industry, by that I mean both technology and media and advertising, all hurt themselves by not caring about the trust in the public.
But let me ask you this,
I think it got
Jeff.
demonized, overdone.
Do you think it's a user's right to tell Facebook or Instagram or Apple or Google, no, I don't want you to track me?
I actually don't think, because I think it's what Glenn just said. A company can set the terms of their use. And they can say,
this is their service.
You want to use this thing? Fine. Here's the deal.
Here's how we pay for it.
This is the deal we make.
Yeah.
Right, like Hulu. You pay a different rate at Hulu with ads and without ads.
Right.
And it is the case that we're using these amazing free services from Google and Facebook. They're absolutely free, and they're paid for by advertising. And that advertising, apparently advertisers believe, I know they tell us this, they need this tracking information.
Yes.
The advertisers have been spoiled by digital media. When you buy a TV ad, when you buy an ad on the Super Bowl, all you know is you're going to reach 80 million people. You don't know which people. Right. And that's why, if you're Coca-Cola, you go, well, they all drink Coke, or worse, they drink Pepsi, and we want them to drink Coke. So that's a worthwhile buy. But when people buy our podcasts, they want to know who am I talking to? And I understand why advertisers want that. And I understand it's a careful balance between us turning over information about our audience. The good news is with podcasting, we can't because it's RSS. All we know is your IP address, and even that we don't really care or know about
until Spotify comes along and changes.
But then that's that's why Spotify's a threat, and iHeart and Amazon and Audible, because all of those shows you listen to only in their app. And their app knows everything. It knows
everything.
Your charge card, your name, address, phone number. It knows how much of the show you listen to, when you listen to it. Did you hear the ad? Did you not hear the ad? And advertisers, if given the choice between knowing absolutely nothing and absolutely everything, always are going to choose everything. Whether it helps them or not, I don't know. But
meanwhile, the other book that I had to read that drove me completely nuts is Jaron Lanier.
10 Arguments for Deleting Your Social Media Accounts.
So this is a companion piece to the much longer Shoshana Zuboff, right? And the view of the moral entrepreneurs here is that advertising is the root of all ills, and so it should become a paid internet, which is a position of extreme privilege, that you can afford to pay for all these services, but many can't, number one.
Right.
Or there's going to be crappy competition and disinformation that's always free. And I think that they're not looking at the larger picture of the ecosystem in which we live.